She smiled and said, "You can help me with the lights. I'll hold the ladder." I never thought a simple favor could change the way I saw someone. She had called earlier that afternoon, her voice carrying that calm warmth she always spoke with, the kind that made even an ordinary sentence sound like an invitation. "Would you mind helping me with the lights tonight?" she'd asked. "I'll hold the ladder." It sounded casual enough. Just a neighbor asking for help before winter truly set in. But there was something about the way she said it, half playful, half genuine, that made me say yes before I even thought about it. By the time I reached her house, the sky was folding into twilight. The air was crisp, scented faintly with pine and wood smoke. Through the window, I could see her moving around, graceful, unhurried, arranging boxes of lights and ornaments on the floor. When she opened the door, the warmth from inside brushed against my face, carrying with it a faint trace of cinnamon and something floral. "Come in," she said with a smile. "I promise I won't make you do all the work." Her laughter was soft but steady, the kind that wrapped around a room and made it feel smaller, cozier. I followed her to the living room, where strands of tangled fairy lights lay like golden vines across the floor. She rolled up her sleeves, exposing just enough of her wrist for me to notice the glint of a thin silver bracelet. Her movements were graceful, deliberate. When she handed me one end of the lights, her fingers brushed mine, light, fleeting, but enough to stir something I couldn't quite name. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she asked, glancing up at me with a teasing smile. "Only if you count helping my mom once," I said. "Then we'll figure it out together," she replied, her tone half mocking, half inviting. There was an ease about her, a quiet confidence that came from years of knowing who she was, and yet beneath that calm, I sensed something else. A hint of loneliness maybe, or a softness she didn't often let people see. As we worked, she hummed softly under her breath, something old and familiar. Every now and then, she'd stop to look at me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel noticed. Like she saw something in me I hadn't realized I was showing. When she mentioned she'd hold the ladder, I laughed, but part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there was more behind her words. She didn't need me to climb up, she could have called anyone. But she'd called me. And now, standing there in the soft glow of half-hung lights, I realized this was more than just decoration. It was connection, quiet, unexpected, and real. And as she smiled up at me, eyes glinting in the amber light, I couldn't help but think, maybe it wasn't the lights she needed help with at all. When she said she'd hold the ladder, I remember thinking, maybe she meant she'd keep me steady too. "You said," the ladder creaked beneath my weight as I climbed, one careful step at a time, holding the string of lights in my hand. The living room smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon, the kind of scent that makes you forget it's cold outside. She stood below me, steadying the ladder with both hands, her voice floating up softly. "Careful," she said, glancing up at me. "That old thing hasn't been used in years." Her tone was light, teasing, but the way she gripped the side rails told another story. She wasn't just holding the ladder, she was holding me steady. There was a quiet trust in it, something grounding, something warm. From up there, I could see the top of her head, the subtle streaks of silver threading through her dark hair. The overhead light caught the curve of her cheek as she looked up, and for a fleeting second, our eyes met. There was no shyness in her gaze, only calm amusement, like she could see right through my nervousness. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "are you studying? Working? Or still figuring out life like the rest of us?" I laughed under my breath. "A bit of everything, I guess." She smiled. "That's good. Keeps you alive, not knowing all the answers yet." Her words lingered longer than they should have. There was something reassuring in the way she said it, like she wasn't just making conversation, she was remembering her own uncertainty once upon a time. As I adjusted the lights along the wall, I heard her humming quietly again, an old tune, low and familiar. It mixed with the faint crackle of the fire and the soft whir of the heater. Time slowed. The world outside her home, the noise, the rush, the constant motion, felt far away. "Does it look even?" I asked. She tilted her head, squinting playfully. Maybe a little crooked, but charmingly so. Like you? I felt heat rise to my face, and she noticed. Her lips curved into a knowing smile before she looked away. It was a small thing, that teasing comment, but it carried a kind of intimacy words shouldn't have held yet. When I came down the ladder, she was still there, one hand resting lightly on the side, the other reaching out instinctively, as if to catch me if I slipped. Our fingers brushed for barely a second, but it was enough. Enough to make me aware of how close she was, how soft her voice sounded when she spoke again. See? You survived, she said, her tone half a whisper. I nodded, smiling, trying to steady the rhythm in my chest. Thanks to you holding it still. She met my eyes, her expression gentle but unreadable. Sometimes all someone needs is a steady hand, she said. The lights flickered above us, glowing softly against the window. But somehow, the room already felt lit, by something quieter, warmer, and far more dangerous. It wasn't the lights that made the room glow that night, I thought as she smiled up at me. It was her. After the last strand of lights blinked to life, she exhaled, a soft, satisfied sound that melted into the quiet hum of the room. The work was done, yet neither of us moved to leave. The air between us felt different now, fuller somehow, holding all the unsaid things that had settled in through laughter, glances, and shared space. She gestured toward the couch. Tea? I nodded, grateful for the excuse to stay a little longer. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I listened to the gentle rhythm of her movements, the clink of mugs, the hiss of the kettle, the faint hum she always seemed to carry with her. When she returned, her hands were wrapped around 2 steaming cups. She handed me one carefully, her fingers grazing mine for just a moment longer than necessary. We sat in the quiet glow of the newly hung lights. The flickering fire cast soft shadows across the room, and the faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon hung in the air. Outside, the world was still, the kind of stillness that feels earned after a long day. She took a sip and smiled faintly. You know, she began, I used to love doing this. Decorating, baking, all of it. But after my husband passed, it just felt strange to keep the traditions going. Her tone wasn't heavy, just honest, like someone describing a season that had quietly ended. I looked at her, unsure what to say, so I didn't say anything at all. Sometimes silence feels kinder than words. She glanced at me then, as if sensing the thought. It's funny, she said. You spend so much time filling your home with light, and one day you realize it's the people, not the bulbs, that kept it glowing. The way she said it, simple, sincere, hit deeper than I expected. I nodded slowly. I think maybe that's why you wanted to hang them again, I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes lifted to mine, soft, searching, a little surprised. Then she smiled. Maybe you're right. For a while, we talked about everything and nothing, work, favorite movies, how quickly the year had gone by. She laughed easily, but there was always that quiet undertone, something thoughtful beneath her words. I found myself wanting to keep her talking, just to hear that sound again, calm, low, melodic. At one point, she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed the way her fingers trembled just slightly. I wanted to reach out, to still them, but I didn't. Some moments are too fragile to touch. The fire popped softly, and for a long while, we just sat there, 2 people surrounded by light, speaking less, feeling more. Somewhere between her stories and the silences that followed, I stopped noticing the age in her voice or the years between us. I just saw her, kind eyes, quiet strength, the warmth she carried even when she wasn't trying. That night, I thought, watching her sip her tea and smile at nothing in particular, I stopped seeing her as older, and started seeing her as real. You said, it had only been a day since I'd last seen her, but when her name flashed on my phone that morning, my heart reacted before my mind did. Hey, she said, her voice laced with that familiar warmth. One of the bulbs went out. I promise it'll only take 5 minutes. I told her I'd be there soon. Maybe I should have hesitated, but I didn't. When I arrived, the air had that sharp winter chill that bites gently at your skin. She stood outside, waiting near the porch, wrapped in a thick gray coat. The soft light from her doorway framed her like a photograph, peaceful, steady, quietly beautiful. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come," she teased. I grinned, holding up the small box of replacement bulbs I'd brought. "You sounded too convincing to say no." Her laugh came easy, light, familiar, the kind of sound that made the cold feel less intrusive. She turned toward the house, motioning for me to follow. "Come on in, hero. The ladder's waiting." Inside, the room felt just like before, cinnamon, pine, and the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. The lights we'd hung together still twinkled faintly across the window. But this time, the silence between us wasn't awkward, it was comfortable, like we'd already learned the rhythm of being around each other. As I started checking the bulbs, she leaned against the wall, watching. "You're good at this," she said softly. "I'm learning from the best," I replied without thinking. She raised an eyebrow, that small, amused smile tugging at the corner of her lips. When I stepped outside to check the plugs, a cold wind swept through. I rubbed my hands together and blew into them, trying to chase away the chill. She noticed instantly. Without a word, she slipped off her gloves, soft, brown leather, lined with fleece, and held them out to me. "Here," she said. "You'll freeze out there." "I can't take those." I started, but she just shook her head. "Don't argue," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You'll make me feel guilty if you get frostbite." I hesitated, then reached for them. Her fingers brushed mine, slow, deliberate, lingering just long enough to make me forget about the cold entirely. For a heartbeat, we didn't move. Our eyes met, and in that small exchange, something wordless passed between us, something that didn't need explanation or permission. She smiled first, that soft, knowing smile that always seemed to say more than her words ever could. "Better?" I nodded. "Much." We went back inside, pretending nothing had happened. But every time I flexed my hands inside those gloves, I could still feel the warmth she'd left behind. She stood by the window, looking at the lights we'd fixed. "Perfect," she said softly. "You always make things brighter." I wanted to tell her that she did too, not just for the room, but for me. If warmth had a shape, I thought as she turned and smiled, it would have been her smile that morning. By the time I'd finished with the last string of lights, the sky outside had deepened into a dusky blue. The windows reflected the soft amber glow inside, turning the room into something almost cinematic, quiet, warm, and suspended in time. She stood beside me, arms folded loosely, admiring our work. "You've officially saved my Christmas," she said, her voice touched with gentle gratitude. "You deserve dinner for this." I smiled, thinking she was joking. But when she turned toward the kitchen and said, "Sit, I'll be quick," I realized she meant it. The smell of rosemary and roasted garlic soon filled the air, and for a moment, I felt like I'd stepped into another life, one where evenings were slower, where someone cooked not out of obligation but care. I tried to protest, but she waved me off with a playful firmness that left no room for argument. "Let me do something nice for once," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "You've done enough climbing for one day." So I stayed, watching her move around the kitchen. She had that same easy grace she always carried, purposeful yet calm. Every small movement felt deliberate. The way she stirred the pan, the way she brushed a lock of hair from her face with the back of her hand. When she finally set the table, it wasn't extravagant, just 2 plates, a candle flickering softly between them, and the faint hum of a jazz record spinning in the background. "It's nothing fancy," she said. "It's perfect," I replied. And I meant it. We talked between bites, about small things, unimportant things, but the pauses between words carried something else. A familiarity. A growing closeness. When she laughed, her eyes lit up in a way that made the candle seem redundant. At one point, as I reached for the bowl she was passing, our fingers touched, and neither of us moved right away. The world didn't spin or stop, it just settled. A quiet understanding passed between us, that this moment, however fleeting, meant something. She noticed it too, I could tell. Her gaze lingered, soft and searching, before she looked down again, pretending to adjust her napkin. "Do you ever get tired of being everyone's helper?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You show up for everyone," she said, her voice low, thoughtful. "But who shows up for you?" I didn't know how to answer that, maybe because the truth was, no one had. At least, not like this. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that spoke for both of us, an acknowledgement of what was growing in the spaces between words. When I looked up, she was already watching me, her expression soft, her lips curved in the faintest smile. I didn't know if it was right to feel this way, I thought, the warmth of her gaze settling deep inside me. But in that moment I knew it was real. After dinner, neither of us made any move to end the evening. The plates sat empty on the table, the candle burned low, and the quiet between us grew softer, not silence, exactly, but something that hummed with meaning. She stood first, gathering the dishes, and I instinctively rose to help. "You don't have to," she said gently. "I want to," I replied. Our hands brushed when I took a plate from her, and she paused, just long enough for me to feel it. Her fingers withdrew slowly, deliberately, as if reluctant to let go. For a second, her eyes met mine, warm, steady, a little uncertain. Then she turned toward the sink, smiling faintly to herself. The rhythm of running water and clinking dishes filled the space between us. I leaned against the counter, watching her in the faint light from the window. The lights we'd hung earlier glowed softly through the glass, a thousand tiny reflections shimmering across her face. "Do you like how they turned out?" I asked. She glanced over her shoulder, following my gaze toward the lights. "I do," she said. "They make the house feel alive again." She hesitated, then added quietly, "You make the house feel alive again." I didn't know what to say. There was something fragile in the way she said it, like she hadn't meant to, like the words had slipped past her guard. So I just nodded, smiling in that small, helpless way you do when a moment feels too heavy for words. When we finished cleaning up, she motioned toward the living room. "Sit for a bit before you go?" The fire was still burning, its light flickering over the walls. She sat on one end of the couch, I on the other, the space between us smaller than before. For a while, we said nothing. The sound of the wind outside pressed faintly against the windows, a quiet reminder of how cold the world was beyond this room. She turned slightly toward me, her voice soft. "It's been a while since I've had company that wasn't out of obligation. I'd forgotten how nice it feels to just talk." I met her gaze. "You make it easy." Something shifted then, subtle, but undeniable. She didn't look away this time. Instead, she leaned just a little closer, her hand finding my arm as she said, "You should visit more often." Her touch was light, barely there, but it anchored me completely. My pulse slowed, my thoughts quieted. There was no rush, no expectation, just the unspoken understanding that we both felt something changing, something neither of us had planned for but couldn't deny. She smiled, that same gentle curve of her lips that always seemed to say everything she didn't. "I like having you here," she whispered. And for a long moment neither of us moved. The lights outside flickered faintly, the fire hissed softly, and I realized that sometimes, the most powerful moments don't need to be spoken at all. And with that, I thought, feeling the warmth of her hand against my arm, the distance between us finally disappeared. You said, a few weeks passed after that evening, yet the memory of it lingered, not in flashes or fragments, but in quiet, steady waves. The lights we'd hung still glowed from her window every night, visible even from across the street. Sometimes, I'd catch myself looking toward that soft, golden shimmer, wondering if she was sitting there too, thinking of the same night. Then, one evening, she called again. Her voice carried that same calm warmth, though softer now, almost hesitant. "I made too much coffee," she said. "Would you like to help me fix that mistake?" I smiled at the phrasing, gentle, familiar, hers. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised. She just smiled, That kind of smile that happens when someone already knows you'll show up. The warmth from inside spilled out again, along with the faint scent of vanilla and coffee. The ladder we'd used still stood in the corner, folded neatly, like a relic from the beginning of something we hadn't fully named. Still holding up? I asked, nodding toward the lights. Still shining, she said softly. Maybe that's a good sign. We settled into the living room, each holding a mug. The fire crackled again, the same rhythm, the same soft light. Yet everything felt different now. There was no uncertainty in the space between us. No guessing, no pretending. Just quiet knowing. She sat close enough that our shoulders brushed lightly when she moved. It wasn't deliberate, but it wasn't accidental either. Her presence felt steady, familiar, like a warmth I'd grown used to without realizing it. Do you ever think, she began slowly, that some people just arrive at the right time? Not too early, not too late, just when we've stopped expecting anyone to. Her words found a home somewhere deep inside me. Yeah, I said quietly. I think that's exactly what happens. She smiled at that, small, genuine, the kind that reaches her eyes. That's what I think too. Outside, snow began to fall in slow, weightless flakes, gathering softly on the window ledge. The lights we'd hung shimmered through them, scattering little pieces of gold across the glass. For a moment neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The air was thick with understanding, the kind that doesn't demand definition. She reached over, her hand resting gently on mine. No hesitation this time, no shy retreat. Just a quiet, certain touch, warm, grounding, real. I turned my palm slightly, lacing my fingers with hers. She looked at me, and there it was again, that same steady calm, that quiet acceptance that had drawn me in from the very first night. We sat like that for a long time, saying nothing, watching the lights glow softly against the falling snow. The lights eventually dimmed, but somehow, the glow between us never did. And as I walked home later that night, I realized something simple. What started as a favor, a few strings of tangled bulbs, had become something far more lasting. She hadn't just needed help with the lights. She needed someone to see her again. And maybe in helping her do that, I'd found a light of my own.